On the way in, I was thinking about the irony of having to quantify music theory and the use of formulas and algorithms so as to make music less formulaic. There was a song playing on the radio that I was like, wow, like, yep, here comes the chorus. And I was like, part of me is sort of done with that. It doesn't mean I'm not going to sit down and listen to my favorite songs of all time and know when a verse is and know when a chorus is. But I think we're on the verge of something far more exciting.
Hi, I'm Linda Marigliano and welcome to Access All ARIAs. We're part of ARIA Week presented by Mitsubishi Motors. First, I would love to acknowledge the Gadigal of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of this land. I pay respect to the elders, both past and present. Our topic for today is artificial intelligence and the future of music for 2020. So throughout this panel discussion, we're going to be talking about what it is, how exactly machine learning works, and what the implications are in the greater musical community. The first person we're going to hear from is Claire Evans. She is part of the Grammy-nominated pop outfit YACHT. This is a fascinating slice into their experience in co-creativity with machine learning and AI in creating their newest record. This is Claire.
Hi, Australia. My name is Claire L. Evans, and I play in a band called YACHT. I'm going to tell you about the process of making our 7th album, Chain Tripping, using machine learning. So the project began about 4 years ago with a deceptively simple question, which was, could we make a YACHT record using AI? We did not know much about what was possible at the time, but we knew that if the project was going to be challenging for us, it couldn't be a generative album, it couldn't be an ambient album, it couldn't be experimental or noisy. We wanted to make an album that actually made sense as part of our catalog. We wanted to make a YACHT album, and that meant creating something that our fans could relate to and that we could perform and actually mean. Essentially, that also meant we wanted to make something that sounded like us and not like software, which was complicated by the fact that we are not coders. So we did not have a lot of control over the shape of our tools. There seems to be a fetish in the industry and in the media for talking about machine learning solely in terms of automation and displacement, which seems to imply that making an album in this way, using these tools, is somehow easier than making an album in the traditional way. And maybe it will be someday, but in our experience, it was not easier. In fact, it was much more tedious and labor intensive. Now, everyone approaches these tools differently, but for us, we wanted to use machine learning at a symbolic level. So to generate notes and lyrics rather than sounds or vocal performances. So we were looking for a tool that was relatively user-friendly, open source, that would give us some control over our input and our output, and that would allow us to work using machine learning at this symbolic level. We settled on using a latent space interpolation model, which is essentially a machine learning model that allows you to plug in pairs of melodies and then explore this sort of psychedelic, high-dimensional mathematical space that exists in between those melodies and sort of sample from that space in generating new melodies. We love this idea of using machine learning to explore and discover patterns and melodies that were already there, hidden in between melodies that we had already written. Now, working in this way forced us to reinterpret our own musical history as data. We had to go back through our 17-year back catalog of music and manually annotate all of this music into MIDI, into a language that the computer could understand. We then ran hundreds and hundreds of melodies through this model, generating hundreds and hundreds of more new generated melodies, which we then listened to, and using a very unscientific process of simply determining what we liked based on taste, selected individual melodies and patterns we thought were interesting, manually arranged them into larger songs, kind of like putting together a sonic puzzle, and then performed everything live using real-deal instrumentation. The lyrics emerged from a parallel process. We actually collaborated with a creative technologist and poet named Ross Goodwin, who trained a character recurrent neural network, that's a text-generating machine learning model, on 20 megabytes, which is to say tens of thousands of pages of lyrics from bands that we loved, from music we grew up listening to, from music of our extended creative communities, and again from our own back catalog. We then printed the results of this model, the output of this model, onto a single massive sheet of dot matrix printer paper, which we brought with us into the studio. Now this is our source text. Every single word on the album is in this document. And we loved the idea that even though we were working with this really cutting-edge technology, our sort of relational experience of it was very tactile and analog and lo-fi. High-tech, lo-fi is kind of the mantra of our band. This working method was inspired by the aleatoric or cut-up writing techniques that were first used by artists and poets in the 1920s. So the Dadaist poet Tristan Tzara said that writing a Dadaist poem simply entailed taking a newspaper, cutting up all the words, putting all those cut up pieces of paper into a bag, shaking it about a little bit, then dumping it out on a table and transcribing those words as you go along, regardless of meaning. The end result somehow still looks like the poet, still reflects the experience of the poet in some way, because what we do when we create art is make meaning, and that's a process that is the same regardless of where you begin. These tools are really good at tearing reality into fragments, if you will, and dumping it into that Dadaist paper bag, jumbling it all around and creating new source material for us to draw from. Our job as artists, then, is to make meaning out of those fragments, to arrange them and to perform them and to kind of convincingly inhabit them until they become no different than our own. What excites me the most about the future isn't new technology. It's that everything that has ever been built, designed, imagined, or recorded continues to exist. And the interrelationship between all of those things only becomes richer and more complex with time. New tools like machine learning and AI don't have to obliterate older creative technologies. They can actually complement one another in really interesting ways. The new reactivates the old, and the old gives context and purpose to the new. I think it's helpful to think of AI not as a tool for inventing a new future, but rather for understanding how we arrive to the present. So when AI goes terribly wrong, either in a creative context or in a broader context, more importantly, it's when we are blindly extrapolating the past into the future, without really taking into account the complexity of human experience or taking advantage of this amazing opportunity that we have to come to terms with and course correct the past to build a better future. I think it's artists' responsibility to think deeply about these things. And if we choose to use these new tools, to use them wisely and to think about how we can understand ourselves and see ourselves more clearly.
So that was Claire Evans, who is going to be joining us in just a moment as part of our AI panel today. Right now, we are going to jump into a presentation with Justin and Charlton from Uncanny Valley. So this is a little slice of what it is like for them when they've gone into the process of co-creativity and songwriting with artists in conjunction with Google's Creative Labs.
Hi everyone, we are Uncanny Valley, music and tech company based in Sydney. My name is Charlton Hill, I'm the head of music and innovation.
And I'm Justin Shave, I'm the music producer and sonic technologist.
So we're working in the field of artificial intelligence and machine learning in music.
So artificial intelligence in this case is software which mimics the way the human brain works. You can use it for creative pursuits in the way that you can analyze large amounts of data and find patterns within that data to generate new ones. Machine learning is the nuts and bolts of that process where we can teach machines to learn, in this case listen to ideas and create new ones.
We see the use of machine learning in the songwriting and composition process as a form of augmented creativity. So over the years, having used drum machines, computers, synths, this is just the next step in using the tools of our time to have spontaneous and creative outcomes.
Recently we collaborated with Google's Creative Lab to create a series of tools involving ML, machine learning, artificial intelligence, in order to explore the collaboration between humans and artificial intelligence in the process of making music.
So the first ML tool for musicians is the demo memo, which was designed to speed up the creative process at that early stage when ideas are flowing and you might be away from the studio and you just want to put down a bit of a thought or a melody or something and capture it in a creative way.
Dada, dun da 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 dun da da.
Demo memo, basically you can sing into it and turn that audio file into different instruments. Kind of hear what it may sound like once you go and take it to the studio and produce it up.
Or if we do like trumpet.
One thing we were using it for actually was getting disco stabs.
That's just like a really nice like bow.
Sometimes all it takes is one sound and you'll go, I want to write something with that. And it'll inspire a melody and then that'll inspire the beat.
We utilised a process called DDSP, which you can teach a machine the sonic fingerprint of an instrument and inject another melody onto that sonic fingerprint and create a sound of that instrument from that melody.
So I could hum into demo memo and then turn it into a violin or a trumpet or as
bass line.
Or as we did for the Eurovision Song Contest, a koala. So the second ML tool for musicians is the Adlibber, which is very much designed as a lyric aid when you've got those initial ideas or song lyrics in progress and you need to spark off something as you would another collaborator. The Adlibber is designed to just give you, I guess, some alternate thought around where you're already heading and might help you get to that next stage.
What about classic? It don't sound old, it sound classic. See, now we're in the spot. Adlibber, you can put lyrics into the app and it'll spit back possible avenues for you to travel within the parameters of those lyrics and that song title and that idea. Oh, I like this. This is a good one. Meat's always in season, so he hunts to kill. I could mold that.
It works from training another neural net called a GPT-2, which analysed a large amount of lyrics and draws relationships between the words and the sentences and the concepts within those lyrics to help you think of new ones. One of the most exciting things we saw when we introduced these tools to the musicians was the different ways in which they approached the use of them. At all times we were trying to encourage that level of creativity, that level of discovery, and I guess the way in which we put these tools together was meant to exaggerate this. At all times, we like to feel that these tools are amplifying and augmenting the creative process. It's something in particular I like to call happy accidents in the studio, which is something I've lived by for a long time, where, you know, unexpected things happen, not exactly what you expect is going to happen. In my case anyway, that creativity sparks new ideas, new directions to take music, and it was a real pleasure watching the artists undergo that same process.
During the time that we were working with Google's Creative Lab on the ML tools, we had the fortune of entering the Eurovision-inspired AI Song Contest out of the Netherlands. This is us, I'm the one in the hat, with our colleague Caroline Pegram, who heads up Innovation and Strategic Partnerships. Caroline put together Team Australia, which was a collaboration of UV with some key academic partners from UNSW and RMIT. And we won, which was fantastic in terms of having a conversation around the use of these tools in a real-world example. I guess I felt that the reason we won was because of the conversation we had around the use of the tools and then the human curation of the outputs. So Justin effectively produced a song like he would produce any song to a chart standard, but you know, majority of the ideas, the seeds and the sparks that came from the AI was what was inputted to create the song.
Yeah, so we were given access to specific data sets, which we used a number of neural nets to churn through. One was the symbolic musical information of all the MIDI data, all the chords and melodies and hooks of the Eurovision songs. Another was the lyrical content of all the Eurovision songs. The third neural net we used was something we came to be known as the koala synth, which was a direct audio neural net implementation where we took Australian native animals and combined them all into one sort of overarching hooky sound which we used in the end product. This came from the use of DDSP, which was something new at the time, straight out of Magenta, and it's recently been released as something called tone transfer,
yes,
which is the idea of taking one waveform and actually transferring it into another of a different instrument or tone or style, and which is actually also the underlying technology underneath the demo memo. We're very excited at Uncanny Valley to be working in this field so as to ensure that Australian artists are a part of a global conversation about machine learning and artificial intelligence that is hotting up.
Technology should be used as an enabler. So if machine learning and AI can help in the creative process, then that's super important.
Machine learning is the next step in the democratisation of songwriting.
I'm seeing a new generation of Australian artists using new tools with their own experiences and creating a unique voice.
If you can put this into a kid's hand that didn't see themselves as artists yesterday, but tomorrow they can give it a shot, that's where you're going to see the change in the game, or the next generation of kids.
So we're joined now on the panel by Claire Evans, whose presentation we just saw. Joining us from LA, we've got Taka Perry, who is a producer and songwriter, and we've got Sian van der Meulen, who has recorded music under the name Miss Blanks, and she's also here as part of the Point Blank agency based in Sydney. And we also have from Uncanny Valley's team, Justin and Charlton. So welcome. I guess let's start by opening this up in terms of what does AI mean in terms of an Australian context? Maybe Justin and Charlton from Uncanny Valley, you can open the can of worms for us.
Sure, thanks, Linda. Yeah, look, Australia's part in, I guess, what is nothing short of a revolution around the use of AI and ML in creativity, and specifically in music is very important. I think if you look back to someone like Peter Vogel in the 80s, who was involved with the creation of one of the first synthesizers that went on to be used by some of the great songwriters around the world. I guess we feel it's there's a similar thing happening at the moment, where the new tools are coming to the surface for use in the creative songwriting process. We're navigating how to use those tools and how to, I guess, integrate them into our workflows, whilst, of course, keeping the craft of songwriting and music production sort of at the, the most important part of that process. So I think Australia is in a great position to keep up with the rest of the world. And I think it's certainly part of our objective to ensure that composers of today and tomorrow, have a chance to sort of keep up with what, is nothing short of a revolution.
As someone that's making music now and producing music, like Sian, how do you feel about that in terms of seeing artists start to use machine learning?
Yeah, well, I mean, in my capacity as partner at Point Blank Group, we work with a lot of artists that don't currently have access to machine learning and AI, not because maybe they don't want to, but more so because I think when we talk about maybe new forms of technology, whilst they're supposed to be a look through to future methods and tools of operation that can be integrated to, say, music, for example, they're also it also comes with this underhand of assumed tech literacy, and how do we access, especially for talent and artists and musicians and creatives and arts practitioners that are, say, in rural and regional areas of Australia, they don't even have basic forms of internet, for example. So the idea of engaging in AI and machine learning, I think there's a lot that they don't know just because they don't have maybe access to those tools right now.
Do you feel like, and anyone can jump in here, and I guess especially Claire, because you've used the technology, do you feel like through the way of like education and accessibility to tools like that, that it can actually open up for musicians that otherwise wouldn't have access to it?
I mean, I think access is a really important question and a really important point, because even if you do have access to the tech, even if you have great internet and you have access to tools and you're able to teach yourself how to code, it's still really complex. I mean, it's still, even for a computer scientist, understanding how to work with machine learning effectively and control all the variables and get exactly what you want out of it is tricky. We're still in a point where the tech is being developed and we don't have a lot of consumer-facing, user-facing, artist-facing tools right now. I mean, my experience was really frustrating working with these tools, because when we first started working on the album, which is about 4 years ago, most of the tools that are maybe a little bit more accessible today were still very much in the command line phase. Like you had to know how to code in order to use them. And we had our head against the wall many, many times just trying to figure it out. I think part of it is just being willing to take the risk and fail repeatedly and maybe not get exactly what you wanted out of the process, but perhaps learn something in the process while you're doing it. But even then, I mean, even if you have the knowledge and the literacy, like the actual computing requirements of training a machine learning model on a custom data set requires a lot of computing power. I mean, there's a reason why big tech companies like Google are sort of the leaders in this domain. They have access to servers that can train massive data sets. And we just don't really have that kind of access as individual consumers. So there's a lot of work to be done to open up this discipline and this sort of these sets of tools to a wider public. And I think we're getting there. I mean, it's certainly evolving really quickly. And I think that every year that goes by, there's new tools that are being presented to people. But I think we probably won't see the real sort of AI art, AI music revolution until we have free open access and intuitive tools which require no knowledge of coding to operate. I mean, it's kind of like, for example, a synthesizer. I mean, you don't have to understand how a synthesizer works in order to play one. I think once we get to the point where we can just play with these models in a kind of tactile and sensory and intuitive way, then we'll start seeing really exciting stuff developing in this field.
Yeah, I think when you did your presentation, I loved kind of seeing the difference in terms of like when you did your presentation, you were talking about how, there might be this, not assumption, but this idea that if you're using machine learning or if you're using AI, that it takes the work out of it and that it's actually easier to write music. But you were like, well, no, it actually gives you a form of inspiration, but you then have to mold it. And it actually took a lot of work and a lot of effort. But if you took something like what the Uncanny Valley guys are doing, like once we get to that level where it's like an intuitive tool that just helps songwrite and helps really speed up that demo process, that's where it could really aid musicians and kind of make accessibility a lot wider for musicians. Taka, how do you feel?
Well, I feel like for me, AI is a really exciting thing. I've talked to a lot of musician friends of mine about how they feel about AI. And I feel like a common feeling people have is like fear that it'll replace their job eventually down the line. But I don't know. I feel like as listeners, we want to hear music that's made by humans and has a story behind it and an experience behind it. And like until we as listeners are so used to listening to AI that, we don't even care about where the music is coming from, I feel like there's always going to be a tendency for people to want to listen to human-made music, and AI being kind of more of a tool to assist the creative process rather than replace humans in the creative process.
Yeah. Claire, you were about to say something just before.
Oh, well, I mean, I think that's totally right on. I think we need to stop thinking about it in terms of either or. It's not like there's music made by human beings and then there's music made by robots, and there's never the twain shall meet, and there's no gradient in between them. There's a huge spectrum of experience between those things. And, maybe somebody will want to listen to purely AI generated pop music exclusively in the future. I find that hard to believe personally, because for me, so much of my joy with music is connecting to, the individual scenes of people that produce that music. I like to know where people come from and what their perspective is. And I like to know what their design sensibility is. And I like to know what their influences are. I like to know all those little pieces that surround the actual object of the song, because for that, that informs a larger understanding of what that person's perspective is on the world. But yeah, I think that, integrating AI into our workflow as artists is really exciting because it's just one more tool, just like the many other tools that have come before that, keep us on our toes and keep us creative and keep us guessing and keep us feeling vulnerable and keep us challenging ourselves so that we don't fall into a rut.
I think it's kind of similar to, like, for example, when autotune came into the music industry around the late 90s and people were saying, like, it doesn't even matter if you can sing anymore. And that was kind of like, there's a lot of negative connotation around autotune. And now it's so ubiquitous in, recorded music. And I feel like once AI becomes more accessible, like Claire was saying, like we'll definitely see like a lot more people using it in new, interesting ways.
And I think autotune's a really good example because not only did it become ubiquitous in terms of, producing clean vocal performances, but it also became its own effect, its own style. And a lot of people use autotune, in a really obvious way because they liked the way it sounded, how strange it sounded and how wonky it sounded. I think we often have to remember that a lot of times tools come out that are designed sort of essentially originally to either simplify a workflow or displace some aspect of labor and replace it with something easier and more efficient. I mean, we see that with drum machines, with synthesizers, with autotune, with a whole bunch of tools. And ultimately that happens a little bit, but then it also creates a condition where artists actually start to experiment with these tools and make new things. I mean, we wouldn't have pop music or hip hop or techno or house or new wave or any of the most interesting music in the 20th century if it hadn't been for synthesizers and drum machines, which, by the way, when they were first introduced, people were so terrified of the displacement that they represented that they tried to ban them. And the British Musicians Union tried to ban synthesizers in the 80s because they thought it would put people out of work. But I think the thing that artists always do, and I think the thing that I think is the most exciting about working with tools that are kind of cutting edge in this way, is that you can kind of find an opportunity to take something which might replace you and make it integral to your practice and make it, start making music that only you can make, only using these tools. You make yourself essential again in a new way, and that's kind of this ongoing cycle of regeneration that happens all the time in pop music.
Yeah, you're continually not having to prove, but you are proving by creating the art that you as the human are irreplaceable.
Yeah, exactly.
And in terms of the impact on the music scene and about how you were saying just then, like new technologies always then get integrated into the existing things that are within our practice already. Justin and Charlton, what are the things that you guys think about at Uncanny Valley in terms of developing the technology and being conscious that there will be a positive impact within the art scene? Like what's the thought process that goes in there in terms of thinking about the good things that will come out and then being aware of certain other bits?
I was just thinking.
Sorry, it's a big one.
I was just thinking about the ways in which the process that we actually invent to where we insert AI and ML into our creative processes is sometimes more of a challenge than using it in itself. I mean, I was going to say, Claire was talking earlier about the crazy things that AI and ML sort of comes out with sometimes, and we found that as well when working with the type of lyrics and type of melodies that the ML sort of starts to spit out. You're often very surprised and almost excited and turned on by this whole. For me, as a creative person, the happy accident syndrome of machine learning and AI is what really drives me towards it and integrating those things into the music. But I think where you insert it is probably more important, I think, than the actual use of it itself. And it eventually probably will become ubiquitous. There'll be a point where you're using ML and AI in your productions, and you don't even have to highlight that. It just sort of happens, or you just use that tool, and no, it doesn't need to be highlighted anymore. So.
It's still that we're still living in this new grey area, which is exciting. Which is exciting, but it's us having to, I guess, think about new ways of figuring out who's written what and where it comes from. But I don't know. I liked in Claire's presentation when you were talking about the Dada movement and how you kind of integrated that, where you took lyrics from all different artists and songs that you've loved in the past, and then you spat them out, and then it was your job to navigate through it and create something new?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think the moral questions are mostly for me oriented around the questions of what goes into the data set and what you're drawing from to train your models to generate what it is that you're using. Like, I mean, by definition, working with machine learning requires, massive amounts of data that is, it can't all be yours, so you have to start pulling from the world around you, from the history of music, from the history of art, to create a robust enough machine learning model to generate notes or to generate lyrics. And when you're doing that, I mean, yes, technically you are kind of building on the previous IP of generations of artists before you. It's tricky because the output, if you compare it line by line, I mean, it's not like you're not taking lyrics from something that existed before, but you are teaching a mathematical model what language is based on only a selection of lyrics that you've chosen. So it's like this really kind of, I'm sure lawyers in the future are going to have a hell of a time trying to, create some standards around how we litigate this. I think that there's some kind of things that feel less icky to me. I mean, I think training a massive data set on, tens of thousands of pages of lyrics that ends up generating all kinds of, fascinating nonsense, for me, that feels okay. But I think sometimes you see machine learning projects where, the idea is, oh, we trained a machine learning model on, all of like Notorious B.I.G.'s raps, and now you can write raps just like Biggie, that kind of thing. You see that a lot, especially in marketing. I think that is really kind of morally very gray, because at that point you're sort of really appropriating somebody else's image and somebody else's identity and all the things that comes with, and the culture and community that comes from. I think we get into a really kind of squicky moral area. It's so, I think, kind of similar in a way to the weird phenomenon of people creating holograms of dead pop stars. I mean, you're sort of bringing someone to life outside of the terms of anything they could have ever agreed to in their lives. So that kind of thing I think is really difficult. I mean, I think it's fine to do that as long as that artist is compensated or that artist's estate is compensated. But when we get into bigger and bigger data sets, it becomes vaguer and vaguer and more ambiguous.
Justin and Charlton, how do you guys feel about pushing artists to use this technology and seeing how exciting it is in terms of pushing the potential?
I think we found that, as you saw in the video before, working with the artists in the Google's Creative Lab, that every artist, it addresses the tools in a different way, wouldn't you say? It's like sort of they're coming into the studio like they would for any session, but then working with AI and trying to get their head around what's being suggested to them. Where did it come from? Are they comfortable with it? Are they not? And there's a varying degree of sort of, how comfortable the artists are or were in this case, in this project. But I think it's case by case, wouldn't you say?
It does depend on how each artist individually feels about using the technology. Yeah, definitely. And I've been working with the different artists on the demo memo in particular. It was interesting to see the way that each artist used it individually. You kind of don't want to dictate how they want to use it. The interface was designed to sort of, learn your way through the application and make it accessible in everyone's own little method. But whether you push it upon them and say, oh, you have to do it this way, you have to do it this way, that's kind of not in the vibe of it. It was more like experiment with this. Please, if it inspires you, feed off what's coming back at you. Kind of jam with it in a way. It's more a way we'd like to think about.
Some of it could be like sampling. I mean, you might have someone come in with a song and say, well, hey, listen, should we try some of that on the guitar or the synth, or actually, shall we generate some interesting sort of mashups with AI and see what it comes up with? That's the sort of tool we're talking about.
I love that. I want to talk a little bit about music and connection, because you touched on it a little bit in at the end of your presentation, Claire. And in terms of the people that are really making music, so Claire, Taka and Sean, I'd love you to just share your perspectives in terms of music being able to remain untouched in terms of communicating a human experience, and that AI may or may not, depending on your perspective, will enhance that.
Yeah. Can I start?
Yeah, go for it.
Well, I think like I was kind of saying earlier with, you know, auto tune and also synthesizers, you know, disruptors that change how, you know, music is made. I think the most important hurdle with AI is going to be, you know, for getting average people that aren't musicians to understand what the technology is, because I feel like people without being educated properly will default to thinking of it in a negative light automatically, that it's not human, that it's cheating. And I think just incorporating it into, you know, the creative process, just as you would any other tool, and not particularly, you know, putting AI on its own pedestal, is going to be, I think, an important part in kind of getting listeners to accept AI being included in the creative process of making music.
Yeah. Sean, how do you feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, I've stepped back from making music, so I'm solely here in the capacity of partner of Point Blank Group. So when I think about the use of AI and machine learning for my artists, I don't think anyone is shy from it. I think if anything, people just want, maybe a bit more education around it, a bit more access, because I think typically, a lot of the times I like to think that there's always this like willingness to learn and like access these cool new things. Even today's conversation, a lot of what's being said and the language that's being used, I don't know what some of the, you know, data sets, so on and so forth. So I also think it's a privileged conversation as well. And I think it's also important to reframe it to privilege as well, because I think for a lot of my artists, they don't have access, they don't have the knowledge, they want to have access, they want to know, but how do they? How do they access? How do they learn? Where are these outreach programs? Where are these, you know, so on and so forth? Because like I said earlier, there's some people that, you know, especially young people that want to access it, but like don't have basic forms of internet. So like, where do we go from here? You know what I mean? So I think, people are always excited by something new. And I think it's really innovative. And I do think it's exciting, so long as it is inclusive and it's for all. And when we talk about accessibility, we actually know what that means and what that looks like in practice. So I don't know.
How can we enhance that accessibility? Like Justin and Charlton, are there things that, like Sean was saying just then, are there plans for outreach programs, for education amongst that, to widen the net?
I think it's very much, you raised a good point, Sean. It's about access, technology in particular, the democratization of the creative process through technology, which in a sense has been, you know, happening for a couple of decades now. I mean, it used to be a very great big barrier to entry to produce music, in terms of, you know, we've seen software come out now on your phone where you can just, you know, put down a beat, you know, access a drum machine from use any sound set. Whereas, you know, a couple of decades ago, it was something you had to go into a studio for to make that finished product. So we were seeing the sort of filtration and process of technology as it will naturally happen. And that same things will no doubt happen with ML and AI. I think, you know, you'll be able to, well, as you can see, I mean, our Google tools that we were working on is probably what we'd like to think is the beginning of that sort of process where, you know, everyone has their phone, it accesses something in the cloud. As you can say, yeah, Sean, they might not have internet access, but, you know, it will probably possible to keep these models locally on our phone. We'll be able to, if we develop the software further. There's also a lot of open source software that can be used and then manipulated. And again, that's, you know, if you don't understand that sort of level of software, that is a barrier to entry in itself. But I think we are in a, you know, to Claire's point earlier, quite an interesting research and development phase that, you know, no one quite knows how to interface with AI, and it should remain quite open for everyone to try and use. And I think it will just naturally, to your point, Justin, become more available. And you know, if a synthesizer was something that people asked for Christmas, then, you know, maybe soon they'll ask for some sort of AI interface.
And also,
I'm kind of crazy
I think we
robot.
should
Yeah, I think, and like, correct me if I'm wrong, but like a lot of these machine learning AI algorithms at the current point of technology, like the algorithms are really complex and deep that generally, like, you can't really run these big algorithms on a single computer. So I think at this point in time, you have to send it out to like cloud servers or cloud computers that process things and then send the outputs back to you. So I think once technology, like consumer technology, like computers, reaches a point where we can actually do these AI algorithms and generations like ourselves locally on a single computer, that's probably going to be like the turning point for everyone being able to access it. And someone will probably come along with a service like Spotify or Splice for samples, where maybe there's a licensing subscription fee, and then in exchange you have like a generative sample plugin that can you enter your parameters and your tempos, and it can give you emotional sad guitars that is completely generated from a large database of music.
Claire, what were you going to say?
I also want to say we shouldn't forget the opportunity that art itself presents to educate and let people into this, because a lot of people, as Taka was saying, a lot of people have a sort of stigma associated with machine learning in their minds. They think about scary, malevolent AI stuff from movies and TV. That's their assumption of what AI is, because artists from previous generations created that vision for them, and it sort of trickled down into the culture, and that's what we think it is now. And I think it's the responsibility of artists working now to find new ways of like having an embodied interpersonal connection with their tools, creating new workflows, bringing new people into the tent, creating new like systems for working with these tools to change our cultural conception of what AI is, and also to create work which on its own stands on its own as art and has value on its own as art, but also which can serve to kind of educate people about what AI is. Because if my only understanding of what AI is like HAL 9000, then it seems scary. But if my understanding of what AI is, oh wow, this artist I like used this tool to make this album that I love, it's a lot less scary. It's a lot more approachable. It makes me feel like, hey, maybe I could do something like this too. Maybe I could be part of the future as well. So I think artists, can use these tools to teach their own audiences about what the stakes are, what the possibilities are, and just the basics of how this stuff actually works.
I don't know if it's completely the onus is on the artists and only the artists to do that work. Only because I think for a lot of artists, especially as we recognize that AI in an Australian context is still quite new, I think it's also up to the service providers, so on and so forth, the people that actually have this experience and insight and knowledge to be doing that work. I don't know if I would put it exactly on the artists.
Yeah, I just hope that everybody, I don't want the world's vision of AI to solely come from Google or to solely come from Facebook or something. I want to make sure that there's also, weirdo punk singers and soul singers and people who are completely outside of the gatekeeper mechanisms, who are also participating and sharing their vision of it. Because otherwise we're just going to get this one really monolithic vision of AI and its applications. And I don't want that.
I think the gatekeeper thing's really, really an important point too, because I know I naturally, without doing heaps of research on it, when I first heard of it happening a few years ago, I remember thinking, oh God, no, this is gonna be the end. What's gonna happen? And then I realized that I was the angry old man yelling at a bit of the angry old man yelling at the cloud, like going, not quite understanding that there could be a broad spectrum of, taking something and that doesn't, the end product doesn't mean that it needs to be devoid of a human context. And that as Briggs was saying in the demo where he used the machine learning to create a song, he's like, this machine doesn't need to tell me how to tell my story, but it can help me just do it quicker than maybe I would do it if I had to then run home and yell it into my phone and then bring it onto my laptop.
Linda, we were guilty of the same thing, but in reverse. We were
what?
Talking about the future of music and how it's all going to be,
integrated with machine learning is going to take us all to this shiny, bright future. But as we got more and more into it, it really isn't going to work without the collaboration between the two and between humans and machine learning, or some kind of process that is between what the ML spits out and what we want to hear. That curation process is always going to be present, I think, in this workflow. And we kind of my person did a bit of a backflip on it and went, okay, yeah, it's we're never going to go back to where I was.
I mean, formulaic music. Oh,
you go, Claire.
I was going to say formulaic music has always existed, I mean,
yeah.
There's plenty of pop singers out there in the world who are singing songs beautifully that were written by, 15 people working in a lab, applying time-tested techniques of, melodic mathematics. I think that in many ways is more impersonal than something that, an independent artist is making using a novel piece of technology that delights and surprises them. I think there's a big spectrum of what we mean when we talk about music being, displaced or something.
I completely agree, Claire. On the way in, I was thinking about the irony of having to quantify music theory and the use of formulas and algorithms so as to make music less formulaic. There was a song playing on the radio that I was like, wow, like, yep, here comes the chorus. And I was like, part of me is sort of done with that. It doesn't mean I'm not going to sit down and listen to my favorite songs of all time and know when a verse is and know when a chorus is. But I think we're on the verge of something far more exciting. And it was only sort of the radio DJs of the 50s, with a 2.5 minute, 3 minute song. Now let's go to the ad break, that actually kind of forced commercial music into that space. And obviously none of those shackles exist anymore. If ever, it's just been the kind of the delivery platforms that we've sort of abided by. So, take away those shackles, and I think we're going to see some really interesting output, and really interesting creativity in music coming.
And I think, like, people say, like, oh, once AI is a readily accessible technology, like, music making is going to be so easy. But I think the onus is still going to be on the artist using that creative technology in weird and different ways, to still make sure that the final product that they're, releasing or promoting is, creative and has that human element to it.
Yeah, totally. If you can just push a button and make a pop song, then everyone can do that. And it's not interesting anymore, right? We just get this, forest for the trees thing where everything sounds the same, and all of a sudden we need new approaches. We need to redefine what a song even is. I think that's really exciting. I mean, human beings have been writing songs forever, but what's beyond songs? What happens after songs? Is there something else that we can create that AI will sort of liberate us from the formula of pop long enough to actually reinvent?
That's exciting. Bring it to us.
I think,
What is beyond songs? That's a whole other panel, Claire.
What is beyond music?
Beyond music.
Yeah. What is beyond music?
I don't know, but I want to see it. I want to hear it. I want to try to discover it.
We're observing around the world, I guess, different approaches towards answering that question, or at least sort of playing with that question. We have a generative music system called Mimu, which is, I guess, our form of what music can be. And in brief, if you look at similar systems, or the idea of having real-time sort of generative music that's morphing and changing based on input variables, suddenly you get to a place where A, it's democratized, B, it's incredibly human and incredibly, free-flowing and spontaneous, because it's feeding off input that's much faster than pre-writing the song, recording the song, releasing the song, or performing it live. So, and then maybe interacting live with AI tools as well. I mean, it just opens up so much opportunity for things that we have not seen and heard before.
What was that called?
Mimu, M-E-M-U. It's a generative music system, but look, there are other versions of this notion around the world, sort of popping up. Abbey Road has their AI, incubator working on things and trying to interact with traditional musicians and find out what it means for the next evolution of generative music and composer contribution.
Sometimes when I think of AI, this is a bit random, I have the same context as to what it felt like being at school when everyone would talk about Y2K, and that it was like this big, like, kind of scary theme that I didn't quite understand what it would mean when we came out the other side of it. But then there was at some point where you realize that you're integrated into it, and that the cream still rises in terms of artistry, and the ability for human creativity and human spontaneity will still be there within an art scene. So I think that's been a nice hurdle for me to overcome in terms of my personal learning towards being educated about what machine learning can possibly be. And I think, as Sean pointed out earlier, just if there is a true priority on things like this being a democratization of music and bringing the ideas of equality more to musicians and to an audience and to people that can feel empowered to create art, then that can only be a positive impact within a scene, I think.
Linda, don't get us wrong. We've still got a truck full of fuel ready to go and 100 cans of baked beans in the cupboard, but I don't think I'll be able to do it, you know.
I'm glad that it's all baked beans.
Cheap.
We shouldn't have any illusions about the fact that people will use machine learning to make music that totally sucks, right? I mean, it's going to happen. It's happening. But there's many different categories and applications of music. I mean, I also like to think about the distinction between sort of functional music and music that expresses something like, you know, real and profound about an artist's perspective. There's lots of music out there, you know, music for meditation, music for jogging, music that you just have on in the house while you're cooking, music that helps you fall asleep. These are all kind of forms of music that I'm not saying are less than or anything, but I think that they serve a different function. And it's, I think, relatively easy to start automating those functions, but I don't think we will ever be able to automate or replace, you know, the truly expressive creative potential of music, because people are always going to be driven to do that. I mean, music isn't just a product, it's a process that people enjoy doing, and artists are going to continually use tools that challenge them and surprise them because it's fun and because it makes them feel good. And you know, I'm excited to see how much that happens and how that evolves and changes.
I think it's like, you know, even without AI, like there's a lot of terrible music, and like, you know, even using autotune as an example, like it's not a crutch. If you're a bad singer and you put autotune on, you're now an autotuned bad singer. And you know, if you're a great singer with great tone, then, you know, and you're using it as a tonal, like T-Pain, for an example, he's a great singer without autotune. Little do people know. And I think it's the same with AI. Like if you're a creative person and, you know, you can make great music without using AI, then I think AI will be like just another arsenal in your creative process. So I think, yeah, it's definitely not a case of, oh, AI is going to mean everyone can make music. Like it's going to be so easy. Like, not at all.
One discussion point usually arises in our talks about AI is that there is not yet an AI that can decide whether something is good or not. It's just, and I'm not sure whether there ever will be an AI that can decide whether something's good or not, or whether the music sucks or whether the music's great. You know, you can't subscribe that subjective notion to a machine. It just seems like it's never going to give the right answer. It's all too subjective.
Which is a good thing. I mean, that's what we bring to the table as listeners of music. I mean, there's plenty of bands I love that other people hate, and vice versa. It's so personal, and that will always be the case.
Yeah. I'd love to pick each of your brains and get maybe just one thing speculatively that you think that the music industry should keep in mind as developments within AI and machine learning go down the track. One thing that we should be keeping in mind. We'll start with the Uncanny Valley boys on the couch.
Linda, I'd say that music first, data second is sort of the most important thing that we see the industry should focus on. And I guess that protects the interests of the craft and the composers and the songwriters. We see some companies in this field sort of going for data and then 2 years down the track sort of looking to hire a composer or a songwriter, which we marvel at. But yeah, I guess keeping the attention to the human craft of songwriting and music, you know, and is paramount.
What he said.
Anyone can jump in.
I think, like, obviously we've talked about kind of, you know, how the integration of AI in the future might look in the music industry, but I think the big hurdle as it starts to become more readily accessible and used, and, you know, being used in songs that are released, is kind of the ownership and the legal side of things, and who owns, you know, the output of a ML algorithm. Like, especially if you're feeding other songs into it to generate that output in the first place, people are going to want to know, like, if there's a #1 Billboard song in 15 years time that was created with samples with ML algorithms, how does that money get divided up? And I think that's going to be something that at the moment, like, we really, like, a lot of labels and publishers, I don't think it's really even crossed their mind just yet, but I think in the next years to come, that's going to be definitely something that's going to have to be figured out, and I don't have the answer for that. But
Sean?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think with anything new, or with most systems, tools, and structures that are to serve the wider community, I think the Australian music industry just needs to be mindful of that wider community and that musical landscape and what that looks like and who are the participants within it. From gatekeeper right down to minority.
Clay?
Yeah, I agree, but I also think it would benefit the music industry in Australia, the music industry in the US, the music industry everywhere, to create as many opportunities as possible for artists to come together with people from outside of their realm, people in tech, you know, coders, researchers, engineers, people who are actually building these tools in sort of informal ways, so that they can, you know, kind of see the whites of each other's eyes and understand where they're coming from and understand what they can bring to each other. Because I think in my experiences, you know, as an artist talking to people on the research side or on the tech side, we always get a lot out of that dialogue. We both learn a lot about what the other one, you know, what the intentions are. And I think it's really helpful for building more equitable and more useful tools moving forward to kind of keep that dialogue open. I think it would be useful to borrow from the tech world and have kind of hackathons where musicians and engineers are working together on projects and just trying things, because it can be fun and it can be collaborative. In fact, I think the best stuff is collaborative, because, you know, not everybody is a techie and not everybody is an artist, but working together, we can build things that are greater than the sum of its parts.
And on that note, I think that that's a wonderful place to end this discussion that I feel like could go into beyond songs, it could go into shit songs, could go into like many other realms of the future of music and AI and the integration of it into the music industry. But thanks so much for having this chat with us today as part of Access All ARIAs, guys.
Amazing. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Linda.
Thank you.